After e4, e6, black is playing the French defense, d4, black can play this move, which is the Benoni variation. Okay, so after this move you play d5. So c5 is met with d5. And in the previous video we went through knight f6 and everything that happens next. In this video we're going to go through something slightly different. Okay, pawn takes. Now here we take back. And now two main ideas. d6, which the problem with this is that it kind of gives birth to a Sicilian. This is like a Sicilian. It's not like, like when you play this type of Sicilian like this, it's this structure. But of course the pawn in e6 is missing and the knight is not in f3. But it's, the white play, the black player has achieved some sort of Sicilian structure without having to worry about the anti-Sicilian. Because if black is a Sicilian player here and you play this move, the black players sometimes they play Sicilian, but they're afraid that you will play some messed up things like knight c3 or maybe f4, McDonnell or Grand Prix or Wing Gambit or Smith-Morra Gambit, all of these things. So what they do is they play e6 because most people play d4 and then they play here. And now this is a Sicilian. It's like, what are you going to do now? If you play knight to f3, now this is a Sicilian. I forgot the name. I think this is like Taimanov or something like that. It's what that rubbish French Sicilian with e6. I made loads of video about it. I never learned the name of it. I don't think he has a name. I think he will acquire a name at some point depending on what happens next. But anyway, you see the point I'm trying to make. So after e4, e6, d4 and c5, try to understand there's a good chance that the opponent is a good Sicilian player. So you play d5, and then take. We're going to look at d6. Let's start with knight f6 first. Now here we play knight f3. And now let's look at a bishop d6, because we're going to look at the d6 type of move in the next variation. So give it a couple of minutes, we'll get there. Let's look at bishop d6. The idea is to not lock this bishop in, and also not to play pawn to g6 because of the usual, the checks you can make, and the black player just wants to castle as soon as possible. So anyway, you're going to do the check no matter what. So queen check, queen blocks, knight to c3. We don't care about the swaps. Let's make an example. If black takes, right, you develop the bishop. a6, stopping knight b5 from happening. Knight b5 is an extremely strong move. Bishop to g5, threatening to take the knight, break the pawn structure. Knight to g8, stopping that. Castle, long. b5, rook ace to e1. And now there's no coming back. If black plays, let's say, knight to e7, to stop the strength of this, this check, the discovered check on the king, you just play knight to e4, attacking this bishop. And that will be, the bishop will have to go, will no longer be protecting the knight. Then you can take the knight, king takes back, then this knight moves and does whatever you want. But even after the bishop moves, you can just play d6 as well. That's even more powerful. But yeah, it depends. Either way, you're completely winning. So that move doesn't work. After rook ace to e1, f6 could be an idea. Does, an attack on the bishop and allows the king to move. The best move now is bishop to e3. Surprisingly, because you're blocking your own pieces. But you see, f5, just to make an example, right, is met with this move anyway. Because what happens is, now you do have this cover check at the idea. A pawn takes back, and knight to b5 comes now. Position evaluated +6, which is completely crazy. You're threatening to take this bishop with a check. The king moves and you go knight f7. There's so much development. It's fantastic. Bishop moving away means knight to c7. There is absolutely nothing here that can save our opponent. King to e7, for instance. Then bishop takes e5 and double attack on the bishop. Now you may argue that this wouldn't have happened if our opponent hadn't played f5 here. That was just an example to see what the plan was. The plan is to take in b5 no matter what. But let's make an example. Let's say if black played king to f7, getting out of trouble, getting out of the attack of these rooks, and then says, let's see where the game goes from here. Wise best move is a4, threatening to take this pawn and then go with the knight to b5, from where the knight will be attacking c7 and d6. If the pawn pushes, knight to e4 comes with an attack on that bishop. Okay, bishop going back is a bit silly, because after d6 attacking the bishop, you go bishop to c4. It's an unbelievable position to play, punishing the opponent. What if bishop goes back to f8, getting out of trouble? Although the game has become just a joke. d6 comes now, and you can't stop all of these problems. You see, bishop c4 is unstoppable. If black plays g6 with the idea of playing king to g7, bishop c4 comes no matter what. King to g7, bishop to d5, attacking the rook, knight to c6. Looks weird because we're allowing our opponent to develop, and you don't really see what bishop to d5 is doing in the first place. but it's just, you know, bishop takes, pawn takes, and d7. So in this position, what if rook a7 instead of knight to c6? Because that doesn't work. Okay, bishop to c5. Let's stop this line here. This is getting ridiculous. So let's look in this position. Earlier we mentioned how everything is about to go wrong. After bishop e3, we mentioned idea f5, king f7. There's no way to stop this attack. What if black plays knight to e7? Okay, knight to e4 comes anyway. Same thing. So there's no point in continuing on this. Let's go back from the beginning. e4, e6, d4, c5. Okay, go up, take, knight f6, knight f3. We're looking at the variation with bishop to d6 and the speedy development. Queen e2 check, queen blocks, and now knight c3. What happens if our opponent doesn't trade? They rather plays a6, stopping the knight from going to b5. What to do now? Bishop g5, same thing. Threatening to take this and break the pawn structure of our opponent. b5, see, this is what we want to do. Take. Okay, knight e4. The bishop now has to move. Bishop e5. d6 comes anyway. Queen to d8, because you see, you don't really want to take the bishop because knight check. And it's game over. The queen is pinned, can't take the knight. So queen to d8. Now knight takes, pawn takes, queen to h5. Attacking the weaknesses. What to do now? Rook f8, for instance. Okay, then check, and it's game over soon. If queen to a5 check in this position, c3 blocks it, and nothing stops you from taking that pawn. f6, the pawn in f7 is pinned, remember. Okay, what if instead black plays knight to c6, the more logical move to defend that pawn. Queen to h6, infiltrating in the territory. Bishop to b7, developing. Too late. There was nothing else that could be done. Knight f6 is coming no matter what. Okay, so what if instead of, black maybe plays queen to b6. Queen g7 comes, and you're gonna checkmate very soon, because the rook can never go and get safe, because knight f6 removes the defender, which is the king, and allows you to take the rook. Let's take this from the start one more time. We can close this saga. d5 comes, take, and now the early d6. So the black player will have to give up on that idea, and the bishop will have to stay there where it is. Okay, bishop to d3, bishop to e7, c4 comes now. It creates a blockade, and now this bishop becomes a little bit stronger. Okay, well, knight f6, knight c3, castle, completely normal game. h3, let's see here. It's a bit crazy, because after rook e8, the best move according to the engine here is knight to f3. But think about it. What discovered checks does our opponent have? They only have bishop f8. It's the only discovered check, so it doesn't do anything. Although you might argue it's still a lot. It still forces us to move. Okay, bishop f8, you play bishop e3. There's absolutely nothing. And also the bishop in e3 means that the knight, that's why we play the move h3. The knight can't jump to g4 to attack the bishop. So bishop e3 is safe there, and you can castle one move later. So bishop f8 is a waste of a move. Let's look at knight to d7. Okay, castle. We're gonna castle no matter what. Bishop f8. a4 comes now. So do you see how playing this variation with the pawn in d6 penalizes this bishop? You're gonna have to play it in fianchetto. It's the only solution. So a4, g6, bishop to c2, bishop to g7, bishop to g5. It sounds weird to play this move because h6 comes straight away, but it's not a problem. You play bishop f4 now, and you are targeting this weakness. Two moves we're gonna look at now. Okay, knight to b6 seems to be making sense. It's targeting this pawn, and it's allowing the queen to defend in d6. Bishop to d3 comes now. Okay, knight to h5 attacks the bishop. What to do? Bishop to h2. Do you see now why h3 is such an important move in this variation? Bishop to d7, developing. Queen to b3, putting pressure on the knight. And this is a skewer. It's a typical move you want to play. You want to play a5, the pawn moves, and then you take in b7. a5 by black, stopping that from happening. Knight e4, capitalizing on that square. Okay, knight to c8, defending it more. Doesn't matter. Queen b7. Rook attacks the queen, queen b3. No compensation whatsoever. Knight cannot go back to b6 because you can take in d6, right? And that's a fantastic position. You're completely winning. If instead bishop to f5, trying to remove this very strong knight. Rook a2, e1. Rook a2, e7 now. Doubling, putting more and more attack here on the knight. It seems a bit scary, but queen to c2. And now after bishop takes, rook takes, f5. Putting more attack on the rook, and coming down with an attack. The black player will have to do something to compensate for the loss of the pawn. Okay, take, surprisingly. And now g4. That's absolutely crazy, but it makes sense because now we're gonna have an attack on this pawn in g6. See, let's say for example, if takes, then knight to h4. And this is a completely winning position. If takes, then bishop to g6. We're threatening all the big things in the world. We're threatening this knight. When the knight moves, because you're also threatening the square h7 with the check. The knight is jumping, giving a check, attacking the rook, discover check with the queen. It's amazing. Knight f6 seems to be doing the job. And our king looks a little bit ugly. But look, this queen and this knight are far from doing anything. White's best move now is bishop to f5. The idea is to play queen d3, queen takes h3. And then to just, play queen to g3, pile up the attack on this poor king, because the position is evaluated +4 at this point. Our king looks unsafe, but it really is safe. So in this position, after bishop f4, what if black plays knight e5 instead of knight b6? Okay, here you take, and after take back, we have a pass pawn, so that's not a good thing. Bishop e3, attacking the pawn, e4, queen to d2. e4 is there to stop the influence of this bishop. King to h7, f3, targeting that pawn more. Pawn takes, rook takes. These are all top engine moves by the engine, by the way. Rook takes here, even crazier. The idea is that if we take the rook, knight to d5 is possible with bishop to d4 coming. And it's really ugly. So take with the queen, knight takes back, bishop to d4, queen takes d4. Boom! It's an incredible move. What are you gonna do now? C takes d4, okay fine. Rook to f7 check. King to g8. Well, if king goes to h8, knight f6 is checkmate unstoppable. So our opponent will have to give up material. If king goes to g8, bishop to g6. And now again, knight f6 is a threat.